Okay guys, we're going to go and do Uber Lilith on our Creeping Death Touch of Death build. We've got our maximum life potion on, our soothing spices to get us our resistances and armors up. And here we go, we're going to go in, we're going to activate her, we're going to jump in, we're just going to try and annihilate her in her first stage. There you go, pretty much one hit her there. So now we're just going to come over here and wait for a second stage, and the aim here is just to annihilate her down the second stage, and then we're just going to have to play the mechanics to get to the end. And once we've done that, that should be easy GG's. So we're just waiting here. Second they spawn, just jump in, go all in, make sure the HP has a go, pretty much completely annihilated down. So now we've just got to wait and not screw up the mechanics here. So we're going to start running around here, onto the floor. I'm just going to keep running around. And then we're just going to come back down here. She should come back across. So we're going to come onto the second platform here. Come onto the floor again. Keep rotating around again. I'm trying to avoid these ghosts at all costs. And then we're going to come onto the floor here. Around here. Come onto the floor here. And we're just going to rotate around until she spawns up in the middle and all these ghosts have disappeared so they can't kill us. And then we're just going to jump in and kill her. And that's it. That is Uber Lilith on the Creeping Death Touch of Death build. Pretty straightforward as long as you get the mechanics correct. Okay, so I've been blasting since Vessel of Hatred came out. And I leveled up on a Touch of Death build. I've been playing into the endgame. I've played around with many mechanics, seen all the techs that people have come up with, and I have settled on this version of the build. I'm calling this the Creeping Death Touch of Death build. Before I get into the ins and outs of this, guys, remember to like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see further content. And come and check me out on my Twitch channel when I'm live, which I'm live on most evenings. This will be linked in the description below. So I'd love to see you there, guys. Okay, let's get into the skill tree here. So we're going to go into the skill tree. I'll just expand it so you can see it a bit better. So we're going to put 1 point into any of the basic skills here. I've gone with Withering Fist. I found that quite nice to level on. And then we just have to put a 2nd point in here to unlock our core skill tree. Come down. We put 1 point into Vigorous and 3 points into Balanced Exertion because that's just free damage for our skill later on. We're converting Touch of Death to a core skill. So this just gives us more damage. And because our core skill is no longer costing any resource due to the Rod of Kepelecki, it doesn't cost us any more vigor, so it's just free damage. Brilliant. So we're going to come down to our focus skill tree now. We're going to take 1 point in Vortex, and we're going to take a 2nd point in Enhanced Vortex, because that gives us more damage after casting Vortex. This I've chosen to go down the route of having it so that we manually cast Vortex rather than getting it from Saw. That gives us a little bit less maneuverability, but it frees up an aspect slot for us, and I find this to be a bit more consistent than using Saw for the crowd control that we're aiming to get from Vortex here. And then on top of this, we're going to put 1 point into Ravager. We're going to put 1 point into Enhanced Ravager because that just helps extend the duration of Ravager. And then absolutely imperative, we need to put 1 point into Measured Ravager. This gives us the ability to just dash between targets every time we cast Touch of Death, which we're going to be casting very, very quickly. And it also gives us 30% vigor generation, which is extremely important on this build for generating our vigor back after consuming it with the Rod of Kepelecki. On top of this, we're going to put 1 point into Focal Point, and we're going to put 3 points into Apex here, because we just go, in the end game, we're just focusing more on damage than damage reduction. There's so much damage reduction baked into this build anyway, we don't necessarily need to take diminishments here. But if you find you're too squishy, you can absolutely put 3 points here and take them out of damage elsewhere. And then we're going to come down to the defensive skill tree. We're going to max out Armored Hide. This is very, very important we max this out. This gives you more passive resolve generation, but it also just reduces the cooldown of the skill, which means we can use it more often. And then we're going to put, I'm just going to go and put 1 point into Enhanced Armored Hide here, because it means every time you cast Armored Hide, it's going to completely refill your resolve stacks, which is extremely important for keeping your tankiness up. I don't put a point into Reinforced Armored Hide. I find that this is extremely good in group situations, but when you're against a single target boss, you only get 5% buff from it, and you're pretty limited on the points of where you want to put them anyway here, so that's why I've not put one there. I've then got 1 point in counterattack, 1 point in counterattack enhancements, and 1 point, particularly important, in reinforced counterattack. We don't actually have this on our hotbar, but our Ring of Midnight Sun allows us to have this by default passively, and we want this passively because it allows us to get the extra critical damage passively when we've got counterattack active for every close enemy that we've got. So this is just a massive damage spike for free without even having to have it on our damage bar. And then we're going to have 1 point into Scourge, and we're going to have 1 point into Enhanced Scourge. We don't take a point in either of the others because we don't need any more lifesteal in this build. We've got so much baked in on Touch of Death anyway, and we don't need any more Vigor generation through Reinforced Scourge here. But we do want the extra multiplicative crowd control damage that Enhanced Scourge gives. So this gives us a pretty good means of staggering bosses as well. So this is quite important. We're going to take 1 point in Patient Guard here for a bit of extra block chance, which we'll go into later as to why that's important. And then we're going to take 2 points in Auspicious here just to give us a bit of extra barrier generation. This will help us get to our 100% barrier on this build, as we can't get as much barrier generation in Tempers as we'd like compared to the Quill Volley build. You don't have to take these 3 points. I have chosen to take them right now. Maybe with extremely cracked gear and you've got absolutely everything perfect, you could possibly get away with not having these, but I find this to keep makes it a lot easier to keep your barrier as close to 100% as possible here, especially when you haven't got enough barrier generation to get your Earthen Bulwark barrier up to 100% maximum life barrier. And I've also taken 2 points in Anti-Venom here. The reason for this is because it's quite hard to cap your resistances on this build, going as minimal as I've gone here. So 2 points here allows you to get your poison resistance up to that point. It is possible if you got a greater affix on a resistance roll on your pants or your ring. I've chosen to go on the pants in the final build. You could potentially get at least 1 point out of here. Or you could use essences, or if you're playing solo, you can use right here to cap your resistances instead and possibly shift the points out of here. But in group play, you'll probably need at least 1 here, and you could possibly get 1 out. We're then going to come down to potency skills. This is where all the magic happens. We're going to absolutely max out Touch of Death. This is our main damage skill. We're then going to take the point in Enhanced Touch of Death, and then the most important node to make this build work, along with the Rod of Kepaleki, is the Poised Touch of Death node. This converts Touch of Death to also be a core skill, costing Vigor and having no cooldown. So it's now a potency skill and a core skill. And when you're wearing the Rod of Kepaleki, this will also convert it to be a basic skill as well. So you can see here it's tagged as a potency skill, basic skill, core skill, and it's also tagged as multiple different spirits. So it becomes a skill that can be multiplied and additively added to in so many different ways. It's actually possible to get the damage on this very, very high. It also means it no longer has a cooldown, and it no longer costs any vigor. So it becomes a bit silly. On top of this, we're going to take 3 points in Vehemence because it's a potency skill still, so that gives us a 30% multiplicative increased damage bonus, and because it doesn't have any cooldown anymore, you're just getting damage for free here, so that's just fantastic. We're going to take 3 points in Resilience because we're going to be casting a Gritter skill pretty often in an Armed Hide, so that just gives us 15% more maximum life for free. That's actually quite significant, as we'll go into later. And we're just going to take 1 point in Ravenous here, which gives us a bit of extra damage and doubles up on healthy enemies. And then we're going to max out Oppressive because that gives us 12% extra multiplicative crowd control damage and gives us extra crowd control durations to help staggering bosses and so forth. We're then going to come down to the ultimate skill nodes. We're going to take Hunter because this can just be cast so much more often than the others, apart from the Eagle. The second node here is the reason why we particularly want to take Hunter. Every time we cast Hunter, it overfills our Veracity by 4 stacks, so that actually fills our Veracity to max and then overfills it by 4 stacks. So if you can cast Hunter often enough, you can just keep your Veracity up at near max all the time anyway, and it means you yourself gain 100% increased damage to injured enemies for 8 seconds, which it basically means you're doubling your damage once enemies are at 35% life or below, which is extremely powerful compared to any of the others that are here. In terms of raw damage, the Hunter is by far the most significant. And on top of that, the Exalted Hunter node here just means every time you kill something with the Hunter around, you've got a pretty significant chance to reset the cooldown, which halves every time it resets until it fails. And because we're reducing our cooldowns and resetting them so often, you pretty much get to a point where you've got Hunter up almost all of the time. So it gets a bit silly. You can go around and you can use this as a move to get around because it's got extreme mobility on it. It can go over walls. It's also got very, very high damage, and it hits multiple times, so it applies lots and lots of Jaguar damage to you, which is particularly significant because over here we take the potent nodes, which means every time we hit an enemy, they take more and more damage. Every time we hit enemies with Jaguar skills, they take more and more damage of you, up to a certain cap. I've got 5 ranks, so that goes up to 50% multiplicative. But if you've got more ranks in here, it goes up 10% per rank. And then on top of that, also Furnace gives us multiplicative increased critical strike damage per stack of Veracity when we use Jaguar skills. And because we're making every skill a Jaguar skill through the spirits, that basically means every skill is going to gain increased critical strike damage here. And because we're casting Hunter so often and getting our Veracity to max stacks +4, it means our critical strike damage increased there is going to be pretty significant. And on top of that, in the ultimate skill nodes, we're taking maximum resolution. We're probably not going to have 100% uptime of this, but if you cast your ultimate often enough, you're going to get 15% increased damage to enemies, doubled if you're only fighting a single target boss. So that's pretty nice. So it gives you burst damage every time you use Hunter. We're going to take 3 points of spiritual attunement because that gives us more maximum vigor whilst we've got an ultimate equipped. That's extremely important later on when using the Rod of Kepalaki for all the extra damage you can get. And then we're going to take 3 points of supremacy because we're going to be casting our ultimate pretty often and killing stuff. And it's also going to be ending pretty regularly. So we should be able to keep our stacks up to 10 here pretty regularly, up to the 30% multiplicative damage that we can get here. So that's pretty significant as well. And then as our key passive, we are going to take Prodigy's Tempo. I tried out all of the others, but quite frankly, at the moment, Prodigy's Tempo really is the most significantly powerful one if you can activate both the basic and the core skill elements, which we can here because Touch of Death has been converted into a basic and a core skill. So just by casting that over and over, you get the benefit of both for free. And this basically allows you to keep all of your cooldowns off cooldown often enough so you can keep near 100% uptime of them all of the time. This is extremely important for Armored Hide. It means you can basically keep that up all the time, giving you an extra 100% block chance. It also means you can just reset your resolve all the time. You can cast Scourge all the time. You can keep 100% uptime of Ravager and so on. It's pretty insane. So that's the skill tree as it can be. You can absolutely shift some of these nodes around. As I said, you could probably take at least 1 point out of Anti-Venom and put them elsewhere. If you didn't particularly want Auspicious and a Patient Guard, you could take these out and put them in Diminishment here for just flat damage reduction. But the benefit of having Auspicious and having more barrier at the time is at the moment that scales your damage using the Viscous Shield node in the Paragon tree, which we'll get into shortly. In terms of spirits, we're using Jaguar for the primary. The reason for this being that the amount of damage you can get from the 15% here after the 15th hit is pretty outrageous, actually. Once you've got your build really going and you're hitting often enough and you've got all of your skills hitting, Ravagers hitting loads of times, you've got your Hunter ultimate hitting multiple times in one go, you're actually going to stack up to that 15th hit pretty often, especially if you've got a group of enemies all around you. If you've got a stack of enemies all around you that you can vortex in, use Hunter, who's hitting them all at the time, each one of those hits counts towards that 15th. And then it will take all of the damage in the last half a second once the 15th hit hits, and it deals 15% of that damage to all of them. Now, if you do significant hits to all of those all at once, it piles them all together and creates this astronomically high number. So that is why we have gone for Jaguar here rather than Gorilla for the barrier generation. Gorilla here does work perfectly fine. It just doesn't have the highest damage output, but you can absolutely use Gorilla here for more defense. So feel free to use that whilst you're leveling. For the secondary, we are using Gorilla instead of Jaguar, which is, so we basically swapped them. When I was leveling, I used Jaguar here because that gave me more maximum Veracity by 1 stack, and it also meant that I could gain Veracity through killing enemies or hitting bosses, which kept the Veracity uptime better. But to be honest, the speed at which you're casting Hunter, you're keeping Veracity up pretty often anyway. And the benefit of having Gorilla in secondary here is you gain 2 maximum resolve stacks, which we'll go into as to why that's so important shortly. when we go through the items. And it also means once you've got above 5 stacks of resolve, you are just unstoppable permanently. There is no cooldown on this when it goes off, and so on. And on this build, we're going to be stacking so many stacks of resolve and resetting it so often, you basically solve crowd control entirely with this. You can basically never be crowd controlled once you get going. It's pretty insane. This is something I would expect possibly to get tuned at some point, but as of right now, it is completely overpowered. In terms of gear, for the helm, we're using Harmony of Ibawaka. This gives us a nice amount of damage reduction, gives us a movement speed and all stats baked in, and most importantly, it gives us the ability to make our skills 3 different spirits all at once. So our centipede skills can be made into Jaguar and Gorilla skills as well, since our primary and secondary spirits are Jaguar and Gorilla. And it means for every single type of spirit we've got active for that skill, it means that they get a 30% multiplicative damage increase. So that's going to give us a 90% multiplicative increase of damage to our Touch of Death skill, which is a pretty outrageous amount of damage increase for one item. For our chest piece, we're using a simple legendary item here. We've got Dexterity, Maximum Life, and Armor on here right now. In an ideal world, I would have a greater affix of Armor on here and possibly 1 Masterwork into it just to help solve Armor. I currently have Juggernauts on here to help solve Armor because I don't have the ability to solve it without that, and I haven't found the gear yet. But if I did have a greater affix with 1 Masterwork here, I could pretty much almost certainly get Juggernauts off here, and you could put a damage aspects on if you like, such as Apprehension or Binding Morass, which gives you multiplicative damage to slowed enemies or feared enemies. I'd probably use Apprehension because Scourge fears enemies, and it means when you stack a bosses, you're going to get a 40% multiplicative bonus to damage, which is pretty significant. Other than that, if you wanted more defense or more barrier generation, resistances or armor baked in, you could use the Forest Power aspect as well, which is the one that casts a Mystic Circle for the Gorilla on lucky hit. And that gives you a 25% barrier whilst you're inside the circle, and it also gives you some armor and resistances. The only thing about that aspect is you have to play inside the circle, so it creates a gameplay where you would be limited to where you can go if you want to gain the benefit from this. In terms of tempers, we've got the Touch of Death Swarm duration. We pretty much get this on every piece of gear we can because this scales the damage on the build, and we've gone for maximum resolve stacks because this also gives us huge amounts of damage reduction, and it gives us huge amounts of damage increase as well, as we'll go into. And for the gloves, we are using a legendary here, and we have got the aspects of Redirected Force on here. This is extremely powerful right now, as we'll go into. It's very powerful anyway, but it's working far better than it should do. It's giving us multiplicative critical damage based on the amount of block chance we've got. Which the block chance, if at 100%, would give us 58% multiplicative damage, doubling up if you block, so that would give us a 116%. If you had a maximum roll of this aspect, it could go up to 140% when doubled up. The reason this is so significantly more powerful right now is that a bug in the game means that even though it shows that block chance goes up to 100%, it actually goes above this. So using any means possible to scale your block chance, you can basically scale your critical strike damage accordingly. If you get to 400% block chance, you're going to get 4 times this bonus of this aspect, say. And that's why it's so ridiculous right now. In terms of stats, we've got Dexterity, Maximum Life, and Core Skills. I have no greater affixes on here right now, but if we did, we would want a greater affix into Core Skills or Maximum Life. Kind of depends if you want to go into the full bugged version or whether you want to go into a version that might be mitigated from the inevitable tunes that are probably coming to the bugs. And in terms of tempers, I've gone for Touch of Death Swarm duration again because that scales our damage, and we've gone for critical strike damage here because we want critical strike damage so that we scale it with our redirected force aspects. For the pants, we've gone for a legendary with the aspect of Interdiction. This is the aspect that's allowing the redirected force aspect to go absolutely crazy. This gives us, it's giving me currently 11% block chance per resolve stack, but it can go up to 15% if you find the best version of the aspect. And the reason this is so ridiculous is I'm currently running 22 stacks of resolve. You can easily get to 30 stacks plus a resolve here, and this means that I'm already getting 220% block chance here, but if you get to 30 plus stacks, you could get to 300 plus. If you had the 15% aspects and got 30 stacks, you'd be up at 450, maybe 500% you could get to if you got absolute max resolve stacked rolls. If you've got that plus your 100% from your Armored Hide and your 45 from your Rod of Kepelecki and your 10% from your passive nodes, you're up at about 600-700% block chance. So you're going to end up getting between 5, 6 or 7 times the amount of damage you should do on Redirected Force right now. It's extremely powerful. And this is actually better than Unyielding Hits tech right now, I would say. In terms of the affixes, you ideally on this piece of gear would have maximum life, all resistance, and basic skills. I actually do have a pair of pants down here that I have rolled into that, but I really need to get some masterwork. I need to get some raw hide so I can masterwork into resistance to all elements first and get the other stats up. I'd probably get one roll of masterwork into resistance to all elements here and then go to the other 2 into resolve stacks. But right now I've got this one in because I've masterworked it a little bit. And this one has maximum life, basic skills, and we have rolled Touch of Death, Swarm duration on it, and maximum resolve stats as the tempers, again for damage and defense across the board. The nodes in the abilities, I might have missed it before up here. The Perseverance node gives us 1.5% additional damage reduction per stack of resolve. So the more resolve we stack, the more damage reduction we get baked in. So this is again why it's extremely powerful, why we stack resolve. You can end up getting 20 stacks, 30 stacks of resolve, getting yourself 30 to 45% of damage reduction baked in. It's pretty insane. Moving on to the boots, we're going for legendaries here. If you can solve your armor resistances enough so you don't have to wear Rakenov's Wake, then legendary here is the best. I'm currently using the aspect that has Sorecast Vortex. This is incorrect. I would actually put duelists on here. I haven't got around to that. I forgot to do it. So all the demonstrations I've done for this build are actually without duelists on, so you just hack a lot faster with it. I was using Saw with Vortex before. That would absolutely work if you don't want to use Vortex on your hotbar. But the only problem with using Saw is if you want Vortex in your arsenal on this build, you will need to take this aspect. In an ideal world, I would change this for the duelists because that gives us an extra 4 stacks or 5 stacks of ferocity if you can find the maximum version of the aspect, which gives you more attack speed, more critical strike damage, and so forth. And then for the stats, we're going for dexterity, maximum life, and movement speed. And for the tempers, we're going for movement speed and touch of death, swarm duration. This is our way of getting pretty decent movement speed on a build, and we can also gain extra core stat and then extra damage through the touch of death, swarm duration. For our weapon, this is the most important piece of the arsenal. We are using the Rod of Kepelecki. It's no shadow of a doubt one of the best weapons in the Spiritborn's arsenal right now. It's used on many different builds. We're going to masterwork into maximum resource as much as possible because this item converts our core skills into basic skills, making them do less damage. But once you're at maximum vigor, you do full damage. It consumes all of your vigor, and then it scales your critical strike damage by a significant amount. On my one right now, 2.8% multiplicative per maximum vigor. So the more maximum resource you've got when you activate the aspects on this weapon, the better. And that makes you do enormous amounts of damage. And in conjunction with the ring that we're using, you can end up regenerating your vigor super fast, so you can just proc this over and over again, creating a cycle of extreme amounts of damage that you wouldn't normally do. The chance for core skills to hit is okay, but it doesn't really work on touch of death the way we'd like it to. Critical strike damage is pretty nice here, and the velocity is pretty much useless to this build, unfortunately. It's good for the other builds that that rely on movement to gain their velocity back, but on this build the velocity doesn't matter so much. For our amulet, I've currently got an amulet that's on with a dexterity ravenous potent roll. This is okay. You definitely want dexterity and potent on here, and you want to temper on touch of death, swarm duration, and maximum resolve stacks again, because it's more damage from the touch of death, swarm duration, and the maximum resolve stacks again scales your defense and your damage alike. For the Ravenous roll, you could absolutely roll any other useful passive damage node, or you could just roll Maximum Knife if you want to use the full bugged version right now with the Viscous Shield scaling off of base health rather than maximum health, which we'll go into shortly. But I've got Ravenous on this one. This is the best amulet I've found so far, so this is what I've used. And for Masterworks, you probably would want to go all in on Potent here. I've just got one on Potent and one on Maximum Resolve stacks right now. Masterworking is very expensive, so I just haven't got to the point where I can actually Masterwork everything properly. In terms of the aspect, this is the most important aspects on this build. We are using Insatiable. This is where every time you kill an enemy with Touch of Death, it creates a swarm for you. This also means when you kill an enemy, it extends the duration of Touch of Death by 0.2 seconds. And it also means when you replace a swarm early, because you can only have 3 maximum. So when you spawn a 4th one, the first one will explode, take its entire duration, take the amount of times it would hit per second, and then it would say, okay, it hits this many times per second, there's this many seconds left, and it takes the base damage and multiplies it upwards, and that will become the base damage of the ultimate damage bucket you're about to apply. It then scales it up by this aspect, and then it starts to go into all of your crit strikes and so forth. And if you've guaranteed the crit strike through the Rod of Kepaleka, that instantly guarantees a critical strike on it and scales it by the multiplicative damage here, and so on, by redirected force and so forth. So the damage here goes absolutely bonkers. This is where most of the damage comes from on this build. You cannot really play this build without this aspect. It just does not work as well. Going on to our legendary ring, we've taken a legendary ring that's got the aspects of Moonrise on. This scales our basic skill damage by up to 100% multiplicative, which, because we're converting Touch of Death into a basic skill through the Rod of Kepaleka, this is pretty significant, and it gives us 20% attack speed into our attack speed bucket 1 and a bit of extra movement speed when we're attacking, so this is just very nice. In terms of affixes, we've gone for Dexterity, Maximum Life, and I've chosen to go for Lucky Vulnerable Hit here. Other builds choose to go for all resistance here or more damage and use Soar with the application of Vulnerable there instead, but I find this to be a bit more consistent across the board, so this is why I've chosen to go this route. You can absolutely use Soar and Vulnerable, but if you do take Vulnerable here, you will need to take Soar with Vulnerable. So just bear that in mind, because otherwise you'll have no means of applying Vulnerable at all. And then for tempers, we've gone for resource generation and crit damage to help our vigor generation when our Rod of Kepaleka consumes all the vigor, and then our Ring of Midnight Sun tries to regenerate it. And we've gone for crit damage just for the extra crit damage here. And for our final item on our unique ring, we're using the Ring of Midnight Sun. This is used on pretty much all of Rod of Kepaleka builds, and the reason for this being, once you've consumed all your vigor on your Rod of Kepaleka aspect, this will allow you to pretty much crit strike immediately afterwards to gain 50% of your vigor straight back, and this is 50% additive. So if you can get 100% resource generation, say, it will give you 100% of your resource back. I don't think I've got 100% resource generation right now. I think I'm sitting at about 60 to 70% plus a bit of extra generation elsewhere, so it doesn't quite regenerate 100% all the time, but if you can get to that point, it's the same as going around having a cooldown shrine on, which basically doubles your damage, I find. So if I can get to that point, my damage will just outright double on this build, and it's already pretty stupid as it is. And I have no greater affixes here, but if you did have a greater affix, you'd want it to be in cooldown reduction or critical strike damage, and you'd probably want to masterwork all in cooldown reduction or critical strike damage, depending on whether. In terms of gems and runes, we've gone for amethysts in our armors because that helps with barrier generation. I've only got 3 big amethysts in here right now. I can definitely get a 4th one in there for another 4%. This helps when Earthen Bulwark procs, that will end up getting that percentage more barrier. The aim is to have 100% uptime on our barrier where possible, because that scales our damage on our viscous shield node in the Paragon tree. In terms of runes, we have got the POC and Q runes on here, which means that when we spend 300% of our maximum resource, we will invoke Druid's Earthen Bulwark, granting us a barrier. The reason this is so good is because every time we get to maximum vigor, we are consuming 100% of our maximum resource on the Rod of Kepaleka, and then we're gaining 50% back pretty much immediately with the Midnight Sun, plus our multiplied by our barrier generation. So you end up in a cycle of spending your maximum vigor pretty much all the time. So you're just going to end up generating 300% maximum resource spent very, very quickly, giving us almost, if not always, permanent uptime of Druid's Earthen Bulwark here, gaining us extreme barrier generation. And then for our other runes, we are using the Zol and Zal, invoke a skill from another class, because we're activating the Druid's Earthen Bulwark often enough that we'll be gaining 150 offering here. And then we're using Zal because that gives us an extra 20% maximum life. This makes us tankier, but more importantly, because of the way that the Viscous Shield Paragon node is bugged right now, this actually increases our damage pretty significantly. So this is why we got this here. Gems in the jewelry, I've gone for 3 resistance gems here. I've gone for a sapphire, a amethyst, and a ruby, so that we can help cap our resistances out. So you'll see right now my resistances aren't quite capped. This is because I don't have my resistance to all elements here on my pants, but if I did, you would be able to cap all your resistances here. And then what I would do is I'd change Rahir's skill tree, which I've currently got set over here, to resistances, but you could absolutely change this so it goes down this route for the armor. So that would help you cap armor without the needs to have a armor essence on when you're playing solo, at least. If you're playing in duos, you'd need to solve armor otherwise, or you'd need to use an armor essence. In terms of mercenaries, we have got, as we've shown before, Rahir over here. You've got two routes you can go here. I'm currently using this route because of the max resistances, and then you just come down here for extra damage, which you can apply through his skills. If you're looking for more armor, you can come down the left-hand side and take Rahir's guard for extra armor, and then you just want to keep following down the left-hand side again for extra damage when they're taunted. I think in an ideal world, you'll take the armor one because the extra damage here from taunts is active a lot more often than the inspiration node is over here. And it's easier to cap your armor here than it is to use to do your resistances. And for our second reinforcement, we're using Variana. The reason I'm using this is because Bloodthirst here grants extra attack speed to you for an extra 10% attack speed for 7 seconds. And with the cooldown reduction applying to them, they can use this way more often than 22 seconds. So this means you just gain an extra 10% attack speed, which just helps us output damage quicker. Variana will also apply when you play in team play, whilst Rahir will not. So this will give you the attack speed whilst you're playing in team play, but you will lose your cap to armor or resistances from Rahir if you are playing in teams. So just bear that in mind. If you're playing in teams, you will need to consider those if they're not capped otherwise. In terms of paragons, we'll try and keep this short. So we've got the starter board here. I've currently got the spirit glyph in here for extra crit damage. I've not got the nodes filled out right now because I need to gain more paragon nodes, but you would want to absolutely max this out as shown in the build planner. We come up into the Viscous Shield board. This is absolutely bugged right now. It's meant to scale your damage by 1% for each 3% of your maximum life. That is currently converted to barrier as well. But this is actually working as if it's coming off of your base life, which is about 5 to 600 life, level 60. So that means for every multiple of 5 or 600 you've got, you're gaining another multiplicative version of this legendary node. So people currently are stacking max life through the ear holes so that they can gain astronomically higher levels of damage than they would be able to. So you can absolutely do that right now, but I would definitely expect that to be bug fixed at some point in the near future. So do that at your peril. The default version in the build planner does not go all in on max life. It does use this a little bit, but it doesn't go all in on max life. There is a top DPS bugged version in there as well, which you can absolutely use, and that will give you far more damage, but that will likely become redundant when they fix this node. For the glyph, we've used Canny in here because non-physical damage across the board and multiplicative damage using non-physical is just very, very nice for us. And then we're taking all of the barrier generation possible and the damage reduction from barrier while you've got a barrier, because that's just all super useful. And all of the clusters where possible, which has armor and max life, because we want to stack that, as we've stated already. We're then coming over into the sapping node, because this gives us basically 30% multiplicative damage all the time, and it gives us some means of generating vigor in case we do not get to 100% through resource generation and the Ring of Midnight Sun. So this allows you to generate up to 100% pretty fast on top of everything else. We're taking all the clusters that have maximum resource and resistance to all elements, maximum life, attack speeds, armor, all of those. And I've currently got the Glyph of Revenge in here, but it turns out the dealing thorns damage part of this doesn't work too well. And especially for this build now that we don't have Gorilla in the primary spirit. So in an ideal world, there's a few different options you could take, but you really want the extra maximum resource that this is giving through the rare nodes. So the only other option you could use here is to go for Menagerist. So the multiplicative legendary part in Incarnate will only scale your Ravager damage. However, this will scale your magic nodes, which means you can get all the benefit that you would get from these rare nodes across your magic nodes instead. It means you could scale your at least one, if not two, strength and intelligence nodes here. So you could gain far more intelligence and strength for free, allowing you to activate your nodes later down the board, such as up here where I still haven't got enough strength. or up here with the intelligence, so you could get more of, you get all these nodes activated far easier. And the other thing about Menagerist is it gives you up to 16% multiplicative damage if you're hitting with all 4 different types of spirits. Now, we've got 3 baked into our skill anyway, and we've got Vortex, which will hit with the Eagle. So this would give us a 16% multiplicative damage, which would absolutely be up pretty much all of the time. That will probably be better than relying on them to hit us for Thorns. The reason this is not so great now, unless you've got the Gorilla Primary on, is it's enemies when they hit you, they specifically them take more damage, not you deal more damage on stacks. So you would have to wait for every single enemy to hit you 15 times before you get the 15% multiplicative damage here, and that just doesn't really happen in combat, whilst the Menagerist will just end up giving you 16% pretty much uptime all the time. So if I'd leveled this one up further, I would have put this here. That's why that's not here right now. The next legendary board we're going to come up to, we're going to take the Legendary No Convergence. This is going to be maxed out completely to the 30% all the time, because it's just super easy to cap this. You're always going to have enough bonus damage in 2 different damage types to be able to cap this out with all the non-physical damage and such you get. We're going to take all the clusters here. I just don't have enough Paragon nodes, all the attack speed, non-physical damage, max life, resistances, armor, and so on. And then I have put Fitness in here currently because that gives us multiplicative crit damage and extra crit damage, and it gives us a little bit of extra vigor generation when you critically strike. Now, this could absolutely be replaced with Fester. I still need to play around with it to see which one really it does feel better. The reason I've landed on this is because at the moment with Redirected Force, the aspect scaling your crit damage, you really want as much critical damage as possible. So this is why I've put this here. It's a shame that the additional bonus isn't a damage bonus here, but this gives us so much more critical strike damage. I think this overall will be better than with the Redirected Force bug that's going on right now with the block chance. But Fester absolutely is an option. This would scale your base skill damage, and it would give you multiplicative damage across the board, although it only gives you the multiplicative damage on the additional bonus when the enemies are crowd controlled. So against bosses, you'd have to wait till they're staggered. And then for the final board, we're coming over into Revealing, because this gives us a means of knocking down vulnerable enemies. And as we've said before, we're going to be making them vulnerable all the time. And we're lucky hitting enough that we should be knocking them down pretty regularly. It gives us a 30% multiplicative increased damage against crowd-controlled enemies, which is super nice. And then we're going to take the Colossal Glyph here, because this is extremely strong. Our skills are all Gorilla skills. It gives us multiplicative damage to close enemies, which is nice, because we're always going to be close to our enemies we attack. And it scales our damage by 2% multiplicative for every stack of Resolve, which is uncapped. So the more stacks of Resolve you've got, the more damage you get. This is by far the most powerful additional bonus you can get in the arsenal right now. And in an ideal world, we would take all of the strength possible here without running out of nodes. We take all the armor and max life, all the attack speed, any resistance nodes are required to cap out resistances, such as the lightning and poison. And then we're going to come up here and take all the max life and armor as well. And the idea here is to try and cap armor, get as much max life, cap our resistances, and then just take as much of the legendary, as much of the glyph nodes as we can to cap them out. I think in the planner I've left a couple of nodes out, say in this board and this board over here, because they just cost too many nodes to get to, and you just run out of Paragon nodes. So that's everything from the build. It's a pretty long rundown. But as you can see, it absolutely blasts from the demonstrations. There are a number of bugged interactions going on right now. Pretty much all Spiritborn builds are using one or more of these. I've tried to create a version that doesn't go all into it, but if you want to go all into it, it will do trillions and trillions of damage. I've hit for about 1 trillion or 1.5 or so, and I've got by no means the best gear. If I had best gear, I'd absolutely see this build go into the higher trillions, and that's without using anything like unyielding hits. So now we're going to go in and demonstrate a kill on a Tormented boss and a pit run. Okay guys, we're going to go and do a Tormented Duriel on our Touch of Death build. We're going to use a maximum life potion, we're going to use a maximum life Red of Mine Buzz essence, and we're going to use a Song of the Mountain to increase our armor essence, just to make sure we're capped here. And then we're just going to go ahead and summon him. And once he's summoned, we're just going to pounce on him, and he should pretty much die immediately. That is the aim here, to kill him faster than he can do anything. So I'm going to stand over here. I'm going to jump on him. He should pretty much just die. There we go. And he's dead. Okay, we're going to go do the boss on a tier 100 pit with our Touch of Death build. And it should just be a matter of hitting him. He should go down pretty fast. Might have to avoid a couple of shadow mechanics. Wait for the damage to build up just a little bit. But he should die pretty fast here. Which one we got here? I tend to personally just try to avoid these, just to avoid getting the stacks, just in case it does take a bit longer. But this build will get a lot more damage than that ago. Once it kicks in, you absolutely